For kids with ADHD, the struggle isn't focus, it's space. A mental workspace so small, so crowded, that memory itself becomes fragile. And when the mind is full, things fall. Not from carelessness, but from capacity. My guest today has spent 2 decades mapping that unseen terrain, those quiet gaps where learning, memory, and emotion collide. She's an award winning psychologist, author of 15 books, and writer of more than 100 scientific papers. That have redefined how we understand learning itself. Please welcome Dr. Tracy Peckham Alloway. Dr. Tracy, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's such an honor.
It's an honor to have you. Could you, give us a quick introduction so listeners can get to know you a bit?
Sure. As you mentioned, my name is Dr. Tracy Alloway, and my whole area of research interest is on a small part of the brain known as working memory. It's located in the prefrontal cortex, this spot right here. And it plays such a critical role in how we process and manage information in our day-to-day lives. And so my research journey has taken me from the classroom to research settings. And more recently, I wanted to be able to communicate how, especially the ADHD brain works in the context of capacity, as you shared. And so I wrote a children's book to address both the strengths and how we use working memory when we have this ADHD brain.
And that's why we love having you here. Like you said, you've spent years studying the brain. So what actually drive a child's ability to learn as well, right? So tell us, for starters, what's the real driver behind learning success that most people maybe overlook?
And I think working memory is often overlooked. We often place a lot of emphasis on intelligence, and surely that is, one aspect of that. But the tricky thing about standardized or traditional views of intelligence is that a lot of it is out of our control. Sometimes we can blame our parents, our environment, our opportunities. But working memory, from my own research and with colleagues around the world, we have identified that working memory is what we call a culture-free way to measure what your brain is able to do. So I've worked with researchers in the Netherlands, in South Africa, in Italy, in Singapore, different regions all around the world. And we see that when the individual is tested in their original language, their mother tongue, their working memory is a true or an accurate representation of that space. What can you actually do with that information? And what I think is so encouraging when it comes to learning success, as you mentioned, is that it really shows us our capacity to learn. So perhaps we may be held back by certain opportunities, lack of, or different types of opportunities. But when we know the working memory capacity of a student, we can really tailor that knowledge, that learning accordingly to help bring success to whatever circumstance the student may be experiencing.
Before we go on with this session, I just wanted to remind you that you can still upgrade to the Summit's VIP Pass. Besides the lifetime access to all the sessions, you also get the audio files, you get the workbook for each session, you get the expert action blueprint with key takeaways from each masterclass, you get the English subtitles, and really a bunch of other things that will save you tons of time and really make a huge difference with your kid and with your family relationships. So if you're a busy parent and you want to get the most out of the summit, then I really encourage you to find the button somewhere on this page and go check it out. You can still get access at a discounted price before our summit ends. And now let's get you back to the program. And when you're talking about the capacity to learn, maybe a few people won't understand that. It's hard, for me to understand. Would you use any metaphor to explain working memory?
Such a great question. I like to use the image of a Post-it note. So if you imagine that little tiny Post-it note, it is limited in capacity. So that capacity changes over time, as you can expect. We do know from research, my own included, when we look across the lifespan, our peak period of working memory capacity is around the late teens to early 20s, where our brain, that prefrontal cortex, is working at full capacity. And so, by capacity, it refers to how much information can you keep on that space. So it could be in a conversation. You're listening to what the other person is saying. You're trying to map it up to knowledge you have from your long-term memory. So you might be thinking, oh, they're talking about art. I remember when I went to a museum 2 years ago. Yes. And so you're mapping information. That is working memory. It's kind of the bridge or that post-it note, that active space where you take in incoming information, you're connecting it to knowledge information you already know. That could be from your childhood, it could be from yesterday, and it could also involve all the senses. It could be smell related. So again, we know that working memory is very easily activated by smells. So childhood memories are activated by certain smells that we have. Sensors, we know from research that even smells like rosemary can activate or open up our working memory. So again, a good learning tip there. So we know that again, working memory is this bridge, this space that we have connecting incoming with existing knowledge that we have.
Right. And if we throw, if we throw ADHD in there, if working memory is that mental workspace, like you say, like the desk where learning actually happens, right? How big is that desk for most people, and how different does it look inside of ADHD brain?
Yes, another great question. So the average, let's say teenager, early 20s, we're looking at maybe 4 to 5, even 6 pieces of information that you could hold at any one time. And when we talk about multitasking or information that you can keep active, you can think about 4 to 6 chunks or pieces of information. And so you may also know from research from education, when you chunk information, so if you remember ABC as a single chunk, that's one piece of information rather than three pieces. With the ADHD brain, we have a smaller desk, a smaller post-it note. So think of a 10-year-old, maybe the average 10-year-old can remember 3 chunks or units of information. The student with ADHD who's 10 would maybe remember 1 or 2. So think about this in the context of the classroom. If a teacher says, okay, class, put this book away, go to your bags, go get the next science book now. 3 pieces of information. The ADHD brain says, okay, I'm supposed to put this book away, math book away, and then what's next? Everything else has fallen off the desk because, again, that space is far more limited.
Mm-hmm. So when we're talking about this desk of a child with ADHD, when that mental workspace, that desk kind of hits the limit, is full, what does that look like for someone with ADHD?
For someone with ADHD, it could look like procrastination. So it could be that they look like they're daydreamers. And in my own research, I've also looked at classroom behaviors of students where I compare them, students without ADHD but have working memory deficits versus students with an ADHD diagnosis. And there's a lot of similarity that the classroom teachers pick up. They're the ones looking out of the classroom. So they may seem unmotivated. They may seem like they don't care. But in fact, the information has fallen off the desk. And sometimes because they don't want to get in trouble, they want to fly below the radar, they don't want to raise their hand and ask for assistance or ask for help. It could also look like the student that raises the hand, but then forgets what they want to say. So it can look like they're losing track of their play. So a few different behaviors we can see, either daydreaming that can be misinterpreted as being unmotivated or even lazy are some of the words that I hear teachers report back. Other ways are that they lose track. So they may want to engage, they may raise their hand, they may start writing, but then forget what they need to do. So we have a lot of unfinished assignments, unfinished work as a result of that.
Right. So if I'm understanding correctly, what I hear you really saying is it's not that the child won't focus on certain thing, but it's their brain is already kind of full, right?
Yeah.
Full of things. So what would you say, what are some of the things that get, instantly mistaken for defiance in these kids whose brains are full?
Again, the lack of completion can be mistaken for defiance, but in the same way, we can think of these symptoms as almost an invisible difficulty. The teacher is not immediately able to see, oh, their desk is full, because it's latent. It's, that capacity is inside the brain. So it's different from a child that may have, a hurt foot or hurt ankle. We don't make them run when they say, oh, look, my foot, is injured, is hurt. That is a visible difficulty. But unfortunately, with ADHD, it's an invisible difficulty. And so the teachers, again, a lot of my research has been working directly in the classrooms to raise awareness. What do these behaviors look like? How can we identify that? So defiance could also be where the student may eventually start pushing back, where they might say, well, I don't know what to do, so I don't want to do it. And again, this is their way of trying to cope, trying to boost up their self-esteem, because they begin to recognize, I'm struggling, but they may not have the words or the skills to ask for help. And as a result, they start feeling defensive. And it can show up as aggression. It can show up as what we call oppositional behaviors, argumentativeness, saying, well, you didn't tell me what to do, or it's not important, where they're trying to protect their own self-esteem. So we also see an overlap between working memory and mental health, that mental wellness, where the students are trying to create a buffer or protection for themselves, maybe not even consciously, but they know they feel bad. They know they are not able to complete the work as they get older. And that was another thing that I looked at. I had a government-funded research with over 3,000 students, and I looked at younger grades, so 7, 8-year-olds, and then I also looked at the 9 to 11-year-old children. And I saw a very different approach with the older children, that the older children not only were showing greater working memory deficits, but they also showed lower scores in self-esteem, especially when it came to their worth of their performance, what they could accomplish. So they began to recognize, hey, I'm not at the same pace as my classmates. I see this now, and now I'm feeling frustrated. I'm feeling bad. And it also starts to show up as learned helplessness. Like, why try? I can't do it. I'm going to forget. Oh, I'm going to fail. And so this idea of learned helplessness also begins to show up as our students go through their academic career.
Right. So there's more and more adding it up, right? And they feel worse and worse. Makes sense. You've once described the experience of a child with ADHD as exhaustion disguised as defiance. So not only lack of completion, pushing back, but the exhaustion itself. If every act of focus costs them twice as much, what happens to their emotional reserves by the end of the school day, let's say?
Yes, it could be very difficult. And to me, what was a very groundbreaking study is the difference that's happening in the brain. So we've already talked about working memory, that smaller desk space, but another unique thing about the ADHD brain is this overactive motor cortex. And this is why we see children in the classroom, they're on the go. Teachers describe them as always in motion, whether it's foot tapping, needing to get out of their desk, even showing up as verbal movement, where they're constantly blurting, interrupting. Again, it's because their brain is wired in such a way that motor cortex is in overdrive compared to the non-ADHD brain. So that exhaustion can also come because not only is that desk space, that working memory smaller when it comes to learning, excuse me, but also that working memory is being diverted to try to suppress some of these impulsive or overactive motor behaviors. And an interesting study done by a colleague of mine, and it was published in a book that I edited, where they found that when ADHD students are allowed to move in the classroom within reason, whether it's a stand-up desk or something like pedals under the desk, for example, to get that movement out, get the wiggles out. Sometimes, younger teachers use that. But when they were allowed to move in the way that is natural for their brain, their motor cortex, their working memory was now free to focus on the learning activity. So think about it. If you're constantly having to self-regulate your behavior, thinking, oh my gosh, if I interrupt, if I stand up, if I move around, I'm going to get in trouble, that working memory resource is already limited, is now being diverted. So there's very little left to focus on learning. But when students, and they measured this using a foot tracker, a motion tracker, and they found that when students were allowed to move within reason in the classroom, their working memory was their scores were higher, and they also performed better in classroom specific activities. So while that exhaustion is can be a natural byproduct of having to manage and regulate that overactive motor cortex, there is an antidote, if you will. So within the classroom, and I have spoken to classroom teachers that provide and facilitate that movement, whether it's, okay, let's take a 5-minute break, go to this area in the classroom that is our movement area of the classroom, or stand up, whatever you need. So again, allowing the student to move allows them to learn more effectively and can minimize that mental fatigue.
Wow, brilliant. So if we stay in school for a while, what does that effort in a child look like, for a child with ADHD whose mind is already so full before the lesson even begins? Like his desk is probably full. So how do we spot that effort?
The minute you start noticing a child disengaged, like disengagement, they're looking away, they're looking around, they're getting those classic symptoms of distractibility are good early indicators that they're already feeling overwhelmed. So it's not that they are, again, it's not that they're unmotivated. It could be that they feel overwhelmed, and that is their coping mechanism. Their coping mechanism is to create a distance from the activity, because if they don't do the activity, then there's no failure. There's no fear of failure from occurring. Again, other research has shown that even simple physical activities, so schools that introduce like a 10-minute or 15-minute run and the track around. So there are many school programs that have started integrating, they call it the 100-mile club. So where students, come to school a little earlier, even without ADHD, they see this increased movement help learning focus, not only for the morning, but that effect is persistent throughout the school day. So again, simple physical activities like that can make a big difference. There was another study done in Northern Europe with classroom children, and they compared traditional seated classroom structure, learning where the children are seated versus movement-based classroom structure. And they found that when the children are moving, when they're learning math and spelling, by the end of the school year, the movement class scored much higher in these subjects compared to just the traditional seated structures. So simple things like that we can modify the classroom environment to accommodate that overloaded desk, that small desk space. And the benefit is that it's not just the students with ADHD that show improvement in learning, the whole class shows a benefit.
So why isn't every school reinforcing this already?
I think a lot of schools are, and I think this is part of summits like what you have created, is to bring awareness, both parents, so at home when the children are doing their homework, let them stand up and do the homework. Let them do, a quick lap around the living room as they're learning their spelling words or multiplication tables, but also so that teachers can begin to have this awareness, both for early detection behaviors like you've highlighted, as well as now what can we do? Now that we know the behaviors, what supports can we offer to our students?
Right. But there's not just school, right? What are some of the other ways that kids with ADHD fill their brain without even realizing it, that's actually taking up that precious workspace?
And this could be the social interaction. So we do see this a lot. We talked about that motor cortex. So that can show up in their peer engagements where they are interrupting. And for them, it's not, they're not trying to be negative or, poor friends. But for them, and I see this with the adult learners too, where they will say, if I don't say it right away, I'll forget. So I have to jump in and say what I need to say right away. But for someone who doesn't understand that, it could look like, well, that person was rude. They just cut me off. I was telling my story. They interrupted me. They always do this. And so it's also about learning how to regulate in social cues, how to maybe take a breath, maybe even use things that they can, like on their fingers, say, okay, first I want to say this, then I want to say this, and I can say it in my head. So then I can let them finish and then jump in. So learning turn taking in conversation, but sometimes that social engagement too can overwhelm and overload their working memory as well.
Brilliant. Okay, let's talk about memory gaps. How do you explain the fact that a child with ADHD can forget an entire day, sometimes, right? Yet remember a random moment, a sound, or just a single line from a cartoon with perfect clarity. How do you explain that?
And this is such a question that I get asked so often, and I love that you brought it up too. And the word ADHD, the attention part, can seem like a misnomer because it's not truly that these individuals have an attentional problem. They have an impulse problem, like we talked about the motor cortex. And in fact, students with ADHD or individuals with ADHD have an incredible ability to hyperfocus. They have laser focus. So talk to anyone with a diagnosis and they'll tell you they can spend hours doing an activity that they love, whether it's Lego or reading a book that they enjoy or whatever that activity is. And they will get right in there and they will know everything about that. And that can show up where they tell you a movie line where no one else remembers, but they're telling you, verbatim the script from what they watched. And again, when we think of ADHD, we often think, oh, they never pay attention, when that's not an accurate representation. Their issue is that they have a hard time, again, inhibiting that impulse control because of that motor cortex. So their hyperfocus is a strength, a superpower, and that's what I talk about too in a lot of my research. So again, in the classroom, if we can maximize that skill, how can we connect new information with that area of interest for them? If they love baseball cards, how can we connect, random science facts or math facts with what they know? So you're creating that bridge to the knowledge that they already have that's existing. And so how can we capitalize on the super focus or hyper focus that they have?
Mm-hmm. So that means we shouldn't, try to correct them or train it out of them, but trying to use it, because that kind of selective memories, I think it feels frustrating to a lot of parents, right? But maybe it's also pointing to something unique in the way these brains encode meaning. So how do we, how should we try to use that?
And that's also another great question. And we do know that the ADHD brain is not linear. So it doesn't go from A to B in problem solving. So, a lot of times we encourage that kind of learning in the classroom. You present the problem and we say, work through it in these steps. 1, 2, 3, 4, you get to the solution. The ADHD is what we call a divergent brain, or think of a circle with many spokes that come out of it. And that is why you often see individuals with ADHD choosing creative careers, whether it's in music or the arts, because that is authentic to how the brain works. And they tend to come up with very creative solutions. And instead of trying to nudge them, you use the expression, a square peg in a round hole, instead of trying to encourage them or push them into a way that is not authentic, allow them to be creative. Maybe say, okay, here is the problem we want to address, whether whatever the subject is. Let's think of 5 different ways we can solve this problem. What would that look like? And my guess is, again, based from research, is you will see highly creative and original responses from the ADHD student, because they're able to connect, oh, well, actually I saw this, and let's bring that all in. So rather than, forcing them to think in a way that's not authentic to them, allow them the space for creativity. And the great thing is there's so much more research now than there was maybe 10, 15 years ago about the value of play, of creative thinking in the classroom. And again, as an educator, as a parent, leaning into that research, saying, how can I encourage that play, that creative thinking when it comes to problem solving, when it comes to learning?
Beautiful. And what would you say is the best part about this memory pattern? When you study the ADHD brain, what's the thing about their memory that actually fascinates you, or that you wish more people understood before they ever used the word deficit, like you said?
Yes, I would say it's that creativity part. And there are studies specifically on brain imaging studies where they look at the creative brain, they look at jazz musicians, they look at poets, and you see this, what's called a diffuse, parts of the brain that are activated are diffuse. In other words, it's all over. It's not just a Broca's area, a language center. It's not just, so for the poets, the most original, the most creative poets are the ones that are drawing from different areas of the brain, the visual parts of the brain, the spatial parts of the brain, not just the language center of the brain. And so we see this with the ADHD brain, and again, jazz musicians, creativity in all of these areas. even in traditional job settings like CEOs of business settings, that creativity approach is highly valued. And so I think that that is a real superpower that the ADHD brain exhibits.
Yeah, and really important for
Mhm.
life, for business,
Yes,
for everything, right?
yes.
Dr. Tracy, you've shown that working memory is trainable.
Mhm.
So, is it actually possible to increase that capacity to build, a bigger workspace, or are we just teaching the brain to use the space it has available to use it more efficient?
Both. So research shows that not only can we include strategies to scaffold or support the space that we have, and we've talked a little bit about some of them already, but there are brain imaging studies to show that we can improve the functional and in some cases even the structural capacity of the brain. I'll give you some examples when I talk about memory as tips or strategies. I like to talk about it as a continuum from slow to fast acting. Slow acting meaning it can take weeks for us to see a benefit. A lot of this research specific to ADHD looks at food, nutrition. So specifically DHA, omega-3 rich foods like eggs with DHA, salmon, those kinds of foods. There's a huge body of research, both with children and adults, to show that omega-3 DHAs actually improve the way we use working memory. Again, I call it slow acting because one meal of salmon isn't going to improve your working memory. You see weeks of this, and there's supplements as well. Another type of food group are called flavonoid-rich foods. So think of foods with rich colors like green in spinach and kale, blue in blueberries. Specifically, research has shown that individuals who drank blueberry extract for 6 weeks improve working memory performance. I want to say by anywhere from 10 to 20%. A dark chocolate that's 70% cocoa solids or higher. Also similar, takes a few weeks before you see benefits. But all of these are science-based ways that nutrition can improve working memory capacity. The scores improve. So that's the slow acting. If you're thinking, I want to see something a little faster, there's some ways to do that. We've talked about running. My own research has shown that running without shoes for as little as 13 minutes improved working memory scores right away. So again, if you're close to a park or something where you feel comfortable running barefoot, or the idea here is that you look at targets on the ground. So when children play the game volcano or earthquake, so you don't want to jump on certain stones, and that attention when you're running improves working memory, and it can be improved in as little as 13 minutes.
Well, that's why it's barefoot, because it's like intention based. Oh, wow.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, and that's exactly why the reason why the barefoot is effective is because you pay more attention when you're running barefoot than you do with shoes. So that's one example. Another example is I found that drawing for 20 minutes. So free drawing. You give them a piece of paper, some colors, say draw whatever you want. And the reason why we saw an improvement in working memory is because you have to create a goal. You have to think, what do I want to draw? You have to make plans towards that goal. Okay, if I want to draw my home, I have to think of what colors, what do I want my home to look like? So it's almost like a mini working memory workout in that 20 minutes of drawing. So simple things like that can make a difference. A learning tip for how to use working memory better for students is to learn before bed. And the reason for that is research shows that sleep helps consolidate some of those memories, lock in some of those memories. So if you're learning new information, maybe vocabulary words, new concepts, my recommendation, even to my college students in my class, is to learn it before bed. And studies show you're more likely to remember that even a week and a half later. So that's the kind of medium effect. And the fast effect we talked about briefly in the beginning is to use rosemary and peppermint oil, essential oils. And those show benefits to improving working memory right away. The reason for that is it opens up the blood-brain barrier for the neurotransmitter, a memory neurotransmitter known as acetylcholine. Choline is the neurotransmitter that starts declining as we get older. So we see that getting less in our, when we look at dementia, cognitive impairments, Alzheimer's, and so on. But for students, they showed that when teachers would have a diffuser in the classroom with rosemary, or peppermint oil, that improves their working memory right away. So if you're learning, you're studying for a test, that's your quick tip right away to be able to improve your space, your desk space. when you're learning new information.
Fascinating. So fascinating. You were mentioning some numbers inside of that, but how much progress is truly possible? You know, if a parent hears that their child can train working memory by running, by drawing, by the
Yeah.
things that you mentioned, should they expect transformation or just improvement?
I think that's a great question. Sometimes we expect any of these to be a magic bullet. We want to go from 0 to 10, and that's seldom the case. So a lot of the studies report improvements in working memory scores anywhere from 10 to 25%. So we're looking at some improvement. We're not looking at, again, that level 10 right away. But sometimes for these students, that can make all the difference for them, because you have these domino effects. We talked about self-esteem and self-confidence. So when the students start saying, wow, instead of struggling on the exam, I actually got a C. Now, a C may, for them, may be an achievement, because before they were really struggling with that. So now their self-confidence builds, and now they start chipping away at that learned helplessness. So they're more motivated to study for the next exam, and you see these grades improving. So I've had students that have said they have put in their own glass ceiling, their own barrier. They said, I can never do it. I have this diagnosis. But then they went to college, no one knew them, and all of a sudden they're A students. And so that barrier can make a big difference. So it's not one magic bullet. I think it's important as parents, as educators, to adopt a holistic approach, that we want to integrate from as many sources as we can, knowing that these things are cumulative. When we improve one, the next thing improves, and then feeds to the next, and it keeps growing that way. So I think that is probably the most healthy and most effective approach to adopt when we're supporting our student learners.
For sure. Yeah. And I'm sure there's a lot of parents listening right now going, so what can I do? What are some of the things they can actually do at home to strengthen that mental workspace?
Yeah. I would say nutrition, like we've talked about, the omega-3, the DHA is a great starting point that can be integrated in their nutritional intake. Knowing that their desk space is small, accommodate that desk space. So like we talked about in the classroom, instead of giving 3 instructions and then feeling frustrated that they're not able to do that, whether it's chores, whether it's homework, give them one thing at a time. So say, okay, let's do this first. You done? Okay, next step. Being able to adjust accordingly helps them identify their own pattern of things too. That would be another thing that the parent can do as far as instruction and support in the classroom, in the home life. Second of all, rather third of all, is help their child be self-aware. Help them identify when are they struggling, and to be able to be self-advocating, to be able to say, hey, you know what? I forgot what you said. Can you say that to me again? Or I'm really struggling in math. What should I do? So being able to have insight into their own learning and then help them find the words or the language to advocate for themselves is important. And the reason it's important is because it addresses this idea of learned helplessness that we talked about earlier. If they know that I can identify my needs and I can find ways to support my needs, they're not going to feel lost or kind of overlooked or anything like that. They can say, okay, I don't feel great, I don't feel like I'm learning, but I know what I can do.
Okay, so giving them instruction one at a time. Nutrition is important. Have them help, to be self-aware. What about on the flip side? What are some of the mistakes that you see parents make without even realizing it? The habits or reactions that might feel like we're helping them, but actually undermine their child's memory development.
Yes, the biggest one that I see links into that motor cortex movement. And both teachers and parents will do this again because they're trying to help. And it's this idea of trying to restrict that movement by saying, why are you moving? We're trying to do homework. Just sit still or stop shaking. And again, in their mind, it's coming probably from a place of love. They want to help them develop, and I'll say in quotes, good behaviors or good patterns and so on. But it's counterproductive because again, it's using that their working memory space, because now the child is thinking, oh my gosh, I better stop shaking, I better stop fidgeting, I better stop doing X and Y, and their working memory is being diverted. So that can really minimize how much space they have to be part of a conversation, even in a social setting, to be part of engaging with their family members. So I would say that is probably the most common thing that we do, both as parents and as educators, and without realizing. Again, it's coming from a place like I want to help encourage these positive behaviors, but in fact, it's not authentic to how their brain works, and it could potentially be uh, putting them at a disadvantage when it comes to the system.
But like you said, we want to help them, and I think it's there's a fine line between support and overcompensation to a child. How do
Yes.
parents know where that line is?
And that's part of good parenting. All parents, the premise I'm guessing is coming from a place of love, of support. And again, agency is important. So we talk about metacognition in the classroom, and metacognition simply means you know what you know. And shifting responsibility away from the parent to the child by saying, hey, how are you feeling about math class today? Do you feel like you're doing a good job? Do you feel like you're learning? What is helping you? What could you need more of? What isn't helping you? So the conversation shifts from telling to asking, where the parents can then ask the child, and it also helps the child build up their own self-awareness at this point. They probably will say, I don't know, I'm just doing it, or it's hard. But again, that consistency will help the child begin to recognize, okay, I guess, yeah, I come home, I study flashcards, that's really helping. Or I come home, I'm so tired, I can't do homework. I need a break before I do homework. So it's about asking rather than telling them, where the parent can help understand the child and also shift agency to the child as their own advocates for their learning.
Mhm. Beautiful, amazing. Okay, Dr. Tracy, I have a couple of rapid fire questions ready for you as well. First one being, how do you reconcile your academic world's seriousness with your delightfully playful approach to the brain?
I think part of that, again, comes from that academic approach that it's not fixed, that we can change this. We can change the way our working memory works. And there's so many fun things we can do. So we talked about running. There are other pieces of research that look at things like jujitsu or climbing. And so being open, I think being curious about learning, about research, is what helps keep me energized when I approach any research question, to know that there's not just one way that we can support memory. There's all these fun ways, and what works for us. There's research in gaming, even improving memory, video gaming, improving memory. So for me as a researcher, curiosity is my first step, is to be curious. If you say, oh, does this work? My response is, well, I don't know. Let's find out together.
Yeah, that's great. You draw a sharp line between happiness and joy. What's the real difference?
That's such a great question, and one that affects us all. Sometimes when we pursue happiness, that's counterintuitive, in that the pursuit of happiness often leads to more unhappiness. Because, again, research shows that happiness is not the goal, it's the outcome. When you pursue things that you're passionate about, whether it's a goal, whether it's family, whether it's social connection, whether it's agency, whatever that goal is for you, happiness is the outcome. And that's a big part of my current research program, is I'm looking to see what goals motivate us. So almost creating a happiness personality profile. So we might think, I'm truly happy when I'm with friends, but really understanding, creating that self-awareness. Actually, we're happy when we have a goal and we can pursue that goal. Or I'm happy when I'm with my family and I feel love from them, or with my friends. And so again, if we pursue happiness, the goalposts, the markers can shift, and that can create a greater sense of unfulfillment or lack of happiness. And so the idea is that pursue a goal that excites you, and happiness will be the outcome.
Nice. So for you, what's one thing that makes you happy but never brings you joy?
Wow, one thing that makes me happy but doesn't bring me joy. I would say happiness is very emotion driven. So in the moment, something can have a rush of dopamine, that quick hit, and that may be maybe an activity at the moment, like running for me, or doing something physical. I like to do a lot of aerial activities, so that can give me a lot of that emotional connection, but maybe not that long term serotonin, that bonding. So I would say the distinction would be if I'm doing the activity on my own versus whether I get to share it with friends. And when I share it with friends, that brings me the joy because that's that serotonin, that bonding hormone that kicks in.
Okay, which brings me to this. What's joy actually doing in the brain that maybe focus and effort cannot?
Such a great question. And one piece of research that looks at that in the context, and by joy, I will use the neurotransmitter or the chemical serotonin because it's more permanent. But from research that has focused a lot on relationships, and it finds that people who release serotonin in a relationship, that bonding, sometimes in popular media, it's called the hug hormone. So when you hug for 20 seconds, your brain releases serotonin again because you feel that physical connection, that emotional connection. Not only do you feel connection, but it also increases, it releases a pain suppressant. So that's why there's research, when you look at medical research, they find that people recover or they heal a lot faster from surgeries when there's touch, physical touch involved from a loved one, even holding your hand when you say someone's present in the hospital all the time. It's sure the presence is important, but it's the touch that is releasing serotonin, and it acts as a pain suppressant in the brain. They've done studies to show that in the same way when you take pain medication, that same morphine type hormone is being released in your brain. So serotonin joy, as you called it, is really powerful because not only does it give us a feeling of satisfaction in our relationships, but it can also help us physically recover from injuries and reduce some of our subjective feeling of pain.
And with learning, how do we keep learning when joy isn't available? Can meaning replace it, or is it joy, the only true fuel for cognition?
That's a great question. And I would go back to different aspects of happiness or what is your goal. And so maybe it isn't that joy that you're finding, but it could be goal driven. So it could be what in psychology or behavioral psychology you call a secondary approach. So you could say, I have to do homework. No one likes homework, but I have to do homework because it gets me to my next goal, which is I want to do well in this class. And the reason I want to do well in this class is because I want to go to college, and I want to go to college because my goal is to become a psychologist, whatever, an engineer or whatever that is. So you can dissociate between your immediate goals, that your immediate goals may not in and of itself bring you joy, but they're a step to your ultimate goal. And recognizing that is part of maturity, is part of growth, and being able to adapt accordingly is important. So recognizing that we all have to do things that don't bring us joy, and that's okay. It's okay to accept that, but to recognize that the goal, that immediate goal, isn't our ultimate outcome. It's leading us to our next goal.
Right. And the last question, what would you say, why is it really important for parents of kids with ADHD to attend a summit like this?
Oh, it's amazing. When I looked online to see the speakers, the breadth of speakers, the expertise that are offered, I think, again, we talked about that awareness for parents to know. And again, a lot of our behaviors, as a parent myself, they're coming out of love. And it's important to have experts to help us, help guide us, help direct us, maybe even help validate us to say, you're doing the right thing, mom, dad, grandparents. And so the fact that this summit brings together experts in all of these different areas is so important because it can feel so isolating as a parent, especially when your child has a learning need. It can feel like you're out here alone, you're paddling, but you're not going anywhere. And a summit like this helps you know that you're not alone. So there's that sense of community in other parents, but also there are experts that are walking with you, that are helping you, validating you, guiding you. So absolutely such a beautiful experience for any parent to be part of.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you, Dr. Tracy, for sharing everything that you've shared, for showing us that going from telling to asking, right, to build their child's self-awareness and maybe just a hug, right? Mm-hmm. These incredible solutions can really help their brains to thrive. I really appreciate you taking the time to join us. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Are you loving the advice and insights you're getting? Well, you can get lifetime access to all the summit sessions when you upgrade your ticket to the VIP Pass. This means you're not only getting unlimited access to the sessions, you will also unlock the audio version of the entire summit, expert action blueprint with key takeaways and action steps, English subtitles, and brilliant workbook that will help you implement everything that you get. You see, the VIP Pass is purposely designed to help you digest all of the content from the summit and implement this advice in your own life. And as you know, the internet is flooded with advice about ADHD. But how much of it actually comes from credible sources? How many times have you been led astray by unknown or unverified advice? Well, unlimited access to the entire summit is a place where information is not only just abundant, it's also trustworthy. So if you want to be confident in the ADHD strategies every step of the way, then I think this is a place to start. I'm totally positive that you're going to love the VIP Pass and all of the valuable resources that we have created for you. It's like having a personal library of expert knowledge right in your pocket. And here's the best part. If for any reason at all you don't love it, we'll refund you in full. No questions asked. So you really have nothing to lose. Grab your VIP Pass now and don't miss this opportunity.